Imagine sitting down to what you believe is a perfectly normal, even healthy meal and not knowing, not even suspecting for a single second, that certain foods on that plate are doing something slow, silent, and absolutely devastating to one of the most important organs in your entire body. That is not a dramatic exaggeration. That is the biochemical reality that millions of people are living right now without any awareness at all. And the most frightening part of this reality is not that these foods are exotic or rare. The most frightening part is that they are ordinary, familiar, beloved. The kinds of foods that appear on breakfast tables, school lunch trays, office snack shelves, and family dinner plates across the world every single day. Today, I am going to show you 6 specific foods that, based on current scientific research, create conditions inside your body that directly threaten the health and long-term survival of your pancreas. Some of these foods are actually marketed as healthy choices. Some of them you probably ate this morning or yesterday. And at least 4 of them are almost certainly sitting in your kitchen right now at this very moment, waiting for your next meal. Before we begin, I want to make something absolutely clear. My intention here is not to terrorize you into never eating again. My intention is not to create panic or make you afraid to open your refrigerator. My intention is to give you something that most people never receive and that most food companies would prefer you never had, which is genuine, specific, science-based knowledge about what these foods are actually doing inside your body at the cellular and molecular level. Because when you understand the mechanism, when you understand the chemistry, you stop making choices on autopilot and you start making choices with real awareness and real power. And that shift from autopilot to awareness is, quite literally, the difference between a body slowly being damaged from the inside and a body that is being consciously protected. So let us talk about your pancreas first, because most people treat this organ as though it does not exist until the day it fails them completely. And by that point, the consequences are often irreversible. Your pancreas sits quietly behind your stomach, roughly 6 inches long, nestled in the curve of your small intestine. It performs 2 of the most critical jobs in your entire physiology, and it performs them simultaneously, every hour of every day, without pause, without rest, and without any visible sign that it is working at all. First, it produces the digestive enzymes that break down everything you eat. Lipase breaks down fat into fatty acids your body can absorb. Protease breaks down protein into amino acids your cells need for repair and building. Amylase breaks down carbohydrates into glucose, which fuels nearly every biological process in your body. Without these enzymes working properly, your body cannot extract meaningful nutrition from food regardless of how carefully you select it or how much of it you consume. A malfunctioning pancreas can leave a person malnourished while eating 3 full meals per day. Second, embedded within the pancreatic tissue are clusters of specialized cells called the islets of Langerhans. These cells produce insulin and glucagon, the 2 master hormones that control your blood glucose level every single second of your life. Insulin is released when blood sugar rises after eating, signaling your cells to open and absorb glucose from the bloodstream. Glucagon is released when blood sugar falls too low, signaling the liver to release stored glucose back into circulation. The balance between these 2 hormones is what keeps your brain thinking clearly, your muscles contracting properly, your heart beating rhythmically, and every organ in your body supplied with the energy it needs to function. Your pancreas maintains that balance continuously, invisibly, without you ever consciously noticing it, until the day something disrupts it. And on that day, the disruption can cascade through every system in your body with frightening speed. And here is the most terrifying truth about your pancreas. It does not complain. It does not send pain signals when it is under metabolic stress. It does not produce symptoms that would alert you to the fact that something is going wrong inside it. It works quietly, absorbs punishment silently, keeps functioning as long as it possibly can, and only reveals that something is catastrophically wrong when the damage has already progressed to a level that is extremely difficult or, in many cases, entirely impossible to reverse. Pancreatic cancer is one of the most lethal cancers in existence. The 5-year survival rate sits below 12%, which means that for every 100 people diagnosed, fewer than 12 will be alive 5 years later. Compare that to breast cancer, where the 5-year survival rate exceeds 90%, or prostate cancer, where it exceeds 98%. The difference is not primarily about the aggressiveness of the cancer cells themselves. The difference is about detection. Pancreatic cancer is almost never detected early because the pancreas produces no accessible symptoms when tumors are small and confined. There is no equivalent of a breast lump you can feel, no PSA blood test with decades of validation behind it, no reliable screening tool that is routinely offered to healthy people the way colonoscopy is offered for colon cancer. The reason it kills so efficiently is exactly the same reason your pancreas never warns you. Symptoms only emerge when the disease has already advanced far beyond the point where straightforward intervention is possible. By the time most patients experience the characteristic pain radiating to the back, develop the jaundice caused by bile duct obstruction, notice the unexplained and accelerating weight loss, or feel the profound fatigue that signals a body under severe systemic stress, the cancer has in many cases already spread beyond the pancreas to surrounding tissue, major blood vessels, and distant organs. By the time most people discover they have it, the window for curative treatment has already closed or narrowed to a degree that is medically devastating and personally catastrophic. This is why prevention is not just the best strategy available. It is very often the only strategy that makes a meaningful difference in outcomes at the population level. And prevention begins with understanding what you are eating at every meal and what those foods are doing to your pancreas over months, years, and decades of repeated exposure. It begins with understanding that cancer does not appear one morning out of nowhere, as though it descended from the sky with no warning and no history. It grows out of an environment that has been constructed gradually, one meal at a time, one inflammatory signal at a time, one damaged DNA strand at a time, one exhausted beta cell at a time. And if the foods you eat every day are consistently contributing to the construction of that environment, then you are participating in building your own risk without knowing it, without choosing it, without ever intending it. Until today. Now let us start with food number 1. The first food is processed meat, and I am talking specifically about bacon, hot dogs, sausages, deli ham, bologna, pepperoni, salami, corned beef, and every other cured, smoked, salted, or chemically preserved meat product that lines supermarket shelves and fills breakfast plates and lunch sandwiches across the world. These products are extraordinarily convenient. They are cheap. They store well. They taste intensely satisfying because they have been engineered over decades to maximize palatability. Many people eat them every single day without a second thought. But what is actually happening inside your body when you eat processed meats regularly is something that the food industry would very much prefer you never fully understood. Here is the science, explained clearly. Processed meats are preserved using compounds called nitrites, specifically sodium nitrite and potassium nitrite. These compounds serve a genuine practical purpose in food manufacturing because they inhibit the growth of dangerous bacteria like Clostridium botulinum, and they give cured meats their characteristic pink color and distinctive flavor. Without nitrites, processed meat would be far more dangerous in a microbiological sense and would not look or taste the way consumers expect. The problem is not the nitrites sitting inert in the package before you eat it. The problem is what those nitrites are transformed into inside your body. When you eat processed meat and it enters the acidic environment of your stomach, and particularly when the meat is cooked at high temperatures before eating, the nitrites react with compounds called amines that are naturally abundant in protein foods. This reaction produces a class of chemicals called nitrosamines. Commit that name to memory. Nitrosamines. The International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is the branch of the World Health Organization responsible for classifying carcinogenic substances, has placed processed meats in Group 1. Group 1 is the highest possible level of evidence for carcinogenicity. It means there is sufficient evidence from studies in humans that this category of food causes cancer. Not probable, not possible, not suggestive. Sufficient evidence of causation in humans. Now here is the connection that goes directly to your pancreas, explained in terms that make biological sense. Nitrosamines are what scientists classify as genotoxic agents. This means they carry the specific, documented capacity to enter your cells, pass through the cell membrane, travel to the nucleus, and directly interact with the DNA stored there. Your DNA is the master instruction code your cells use to replicate, divide, perform their specialized functions, and regulate their own growth. When that instruction code gets chemically damaged, cells begin receiving corrupted instructions. They divide incorrectly. They fail to recognize signals that tell normal cells when to stop growing. They begin to behave in ways that serve no legitimate biological purpose. And when cells lose their ability to respond to growth control signals, that is the foundational mechanism through which cancer begins. Every time you eat processed meat, nitrosamines form in your digestive system, enter your bloodstream, and are delivered to every tissue in your body, including your pancreatic tissue. One exposure does not destroy an organ. The human body has repair mechanisms, antioxidant defenses, and DNA correction systems specifically designed to handle occasional damage. But those systems have a finite capacity. Think about what consistent, repeated exposure across years and decades does to pancreatic cells that are already operating under constant metabolic pressure from all the other demands your body places on them. The repair systems become overwhelmed. Errors begin to accumulate faster than they can be corrected. And in that environment of accumulated uncorrected errors, cancer finds its opening. The practical solutions here are direct and genuinely actionable starting today. Replace processed meats with whole, minimally processed protein sources wherever possible. Fresh chicken, fresh fish, eggs, legumes, lentils, tofu, and tempeh all provide excellent protein without nitrite chemistry. When you want the flavor profile of cured meat, look for products specifically labeled as nitrite-free, as some producers now use natural preservation methods involving celery powder or other alternatives. Critically important is to limit processed meat from something you eat every day to something you eat occasionally, meaning a few times per month at most. When you do eat it, avoid cooking it at very high temperatures, particularly charring or blackening, because the formation of harmful compounds, including nitrosamines and a separate class of mutagens called heterocyclic amines, accelerates dramatically with extreme heat. Light cooking at moderate temperatures is meaningfully less damaging than aggressive high-heat cooking. Now let us move to food number 2, and this one will surprise and genuinely unsettle many people who consider themselves to be making health-conscious choices. The second food is sugary drinks, and I mean every single type of them. Regular sodas, fruit juices, including those prominently marketed as 100% natural and pure energy drinks, sweetened iced teas, flavored lemonades, coffee beverages loaded with syrup and sweetener, sports drinks, and the seemingly innocent vitamin waters that line gym refrigerators. If it tastes sweet and it comes in a bottle, can, carton, or cup, pay close attention to what I am about to explain, because the relationship between these drinks and your pancreas is one of the most well-established and most consistently ignored nutritional hazards in modern medicine. Here is the mechanism explained with the clarity it deserves. Every time you drink a large quantity of sugar, particularly fructose, which is the primary sugar in fruit juice and the high fructose corn syrup used in most commercial beverages, your blood glucose level rises sharply and very rapidly. The speed of this rise is critically important. Unlike whole foods that deliver sugars slowly alongside fiber, protein, and fat, liquid sugar hits your bloodstream almost instantaneously. Your pancreas detects this sharp spike and responds by releasing a large surge of insulin. Insulin is the hormone that signals your cells to open their glucose transporters and absorb the sugar from the blood. This spike and response cycle is entirely normal and healthy when it occurs occasionally after a naturally sweet whole food. The catastrophic problem begins when it occurs repeatedly, multiple times every single day, day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. Your pancreatic beta cells, which are the specialized cells within the islets of Langerhans that are specifically responsible for manufacturing and releasing insulin, are forced to operate at maximum output constantly. They function like a pump that is never allowed to rest, never allowed to recover, never allowed to work at a sustainable pace. Over time, this relentless overactivation exhausts these cells. Their insulin production becomes less efficient. The insulin they do produce becomes less potent. At the same time, your body's muscle and fat cells, which are the primary consumers of blood glucose, gradually stop responding to insulin as effectively as they once did. They become resistant to its signal. Your pancreas compensates by attempting to produce even more insulin, placing even greater strain on beta cells that are already struggling. And this cycle of increasing demand and decreasing capacity accelerates until the metabolic system begins to fail structurally. The clinical name for the end state of this process is type 2 diabetes. But I need you to understand something that the standard medical framing often obscures. Type 2 diabetes is not just a blood sugar management problem. It is a direct and visible sign that your pancreas has been pushed past its functional capacity. It is the moment when years of accumulated metabolic damage become impossible for the body to hide. And type 2 diabetes is itself a strongly and independently established risk factor for pancreatic cancer. The association appears consistently across dozens of large population studies conducted on multiple continents with millions of combined participants. The relationship is not coincidental. It reflects the shared underlying biology of pancreatic stress, beta cell damage, and chronic inflammatory signaling. There is also a second mechanism at work here that receives far less public attention despite its importance. Fructose, unlike glucose, is metabolized primarily in the liver rather than throughout the body cells. When fructose arrives at the liver in large quantities, as happens with regular beverage consumption, it overwhelms the liver's processing capacity and a significant portion is converted directly to fat. This process promotes the accumulation of visceral fat, which is the metabolically active fat deposited around your internal organs. Visceral fat is not simply stored energy. It is an active tissue that continuously secretes inflammatory, signaling molecules called pro-inflammatory cytokines. These cytokines circulate through the bloodstream and reach every organ, including your pancreas, where they contribute to chronic low-grade inflammation around and within the organ itself. And as we will see again and again across these 6 foods, chronic low-grade inflammation is not a minor inconvenience. It is one of the primary biological conditions that creates the environment in which cancer initiates, progresses, and spreads. The solution here is genuinely straightforward, even if the habit change requires real discipline. Remove sweetened beverages from your daily routine entirely or reduce them to genuine rarities. Replace them with water, plain sparkling water, unsweetened herbal tea, or black coffee. When you want something sweet to drink, dilute a small amount of fruit juice with a large amount of water to dramatically reduce the fructose load per glass. When you want sweetness from fruit, eat the whole fruit rather than drinking its juice, because an intact whole fruit, the fructose, is delivered together with fiber, cell wall material, and other compounds that significantly slow its absorption and prevent the sharp blood glucose spike that damages beta cells. Read ingredient labels carefully and skeptically, because added sugars appear in products ranging from pasta sauce to salad dressing to bread under dozens of different names, including cane juice, dextrose, maltose, evaporated cane sugar, and agave syrup, all of which behave similarly once they enter your bloodstream. Food number 3 will challenge something that enormous numbers of people have been told is the absolute foundation of a healthy, balanced diet. The third food is refined white flour products. White bread, white pasta, white rice in large quantities, crackers, most commercial breakfast cereals, biscuits, cakes, pastries, donuts, muffins, and the overwhelming majority of packaged and processed baked goods that fill entire aisles of every supermarket on Earth. These foods are pervasive. They are inexpensive. They are shelf-stable and convenient. They are culturally embedded in cuisines worldwide. And the way they behave inside your body, in terms of what they ask of your pancreas specifically, is far more damaging than their completely ordinary appearance suggests. Here is the explanation that no one puts on the side of the bread bag. To produce white flour from wheat, the grain is processed to strip away the bran and germ layers. This removes the fiber, the B vitamins, the minerals like magnesium and zinc, the healthy fats, and much of the protein that whole wheat naturally contains. What remains after processing is almost pure starch, with a minimal amount of protein and virtually no fiber or micronutrients of consequence. Your digestive system breaks this refined starch down into glucose with remarkable efficiency and speed. The glycemic index of white bread, which is the measure of how rapidly a food raises blood glucose compared to pure sugar, is nearly identical to that of glucose itself. Eating white bread produces a blood sugar response that is functionally similar to eating pure table sugar. The same brutal demand on your pancreatic beta cells that we described with sugary drinks is triggered by refined flour through a slightly different pathway, but with the same ultimate metabolic consequence. But there is a second dimension of danger with refined flour products specifically that most people have never encountered, and it involves a compound called acrylamide. When starchy foods are exposed to temperatures above approximately 120 degrees Celsius, which happens during baking, frying, roasting, and toasting, a chemical reaction called the Maillard reaction proceeds between the amino acid asparagine and naturally present reducing sugars in the starchy food. One of the products of this reaction is acrylamide. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies acrylamide as a probable human carcinogen, placed in Group 2A. Multiple animal studies have demonstrated that acrylamide causes cancer at multiple sites when administered at relevant doses. The mechanistic evidence showing how acrylamide damages DNA and disrupts normal cell biology is well established and has been replicated across numerous independent research groups. The epidemiological evidence in human populations is still developing and debated, but the mechanistic case for taking acrylamide exposure seriously is strong. The foods with the highest acrylamide concentrations are precisely the refined starch products cooked at high heat that form such a disproportionate share of the modern diet. Bread crusts and toast, crackers and biscuits, fried dough products of all kinds, certain breakfast cereals, and because refined flour simultaneously delivers the glycemic shock of near-pure starch while also generating acrylamide during cooking, it represents a genuine double burden for your pancreas. One mechanism exhausts the insulin-producing cells. The other delivers a probable carcinogen to the tissue that must process and manage everything absorbed through your digestive system. The practical path forward here is the replacement of refined flour products with whole grain alternatives in your regular diet. Whole grain bread, whole grain pasta, oats, barley, buckwheat, and quinoa all deliver the same fundamental caloric energy that refined flour provides, but with their fiber intact, which substantially slows glucose absorption, prevents the sharp insulin spikes that damage beta cells, and feeds the beneficial bacteria in your gut microbiome. Lowering the cooking temperature for starchy foods meaningfully reduces acrylamide formation. Toasting bread to a light golden color rather than a dark brown produces significantly less acrylamide than heavily darkened toast. Baking at moderate rather than extreme temperatures has a similar protective effect. These are not dramatic sacrifices. They are small, consistent adjustments that accumulate into meaningful reductions in harmful exposure across the months and years of a lifetime. Now we reach food number 4, and this one will genuinely shock many people who have made significant effort to eat more consciously and healthfully over the years. The fourth food is margarine and any product containing partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which are the primary dietary source of industrially produced artificial trans fats. You will find these fats in various margarines and spreads, commercial shortenings used in baking, many packaged crackers and cookies, non-dairy creamers used in coffee, many fried fast food products, and various processed snack foods. Despite years of significant regulatory pressure that has reduced their presence in the food supply of certain countries, trans fats remain present in the global food chain and in the diets of hundreds of millions of people. They are also one of the most chemically destructive substances you can put into your body on a regular basis, with effects that extend all the way to the cellular architecture of your pancreatic tissue. Here is the mechanism at the level that actually matters. Your cell membranes, including the membranes surrounding every single pancreatic cell in your body, are constructed from fat molecules arranged in a precise and highly organized bilayer structure. The physical properties of those fat molecules determine how fluid, flexible, and functionally responsive the membrane is. They determine how well it conducts the chemical signals that cells use to communicate with each other and with the hormones circulating in your blood. They determine how efficiently the embedded protein receptors on the membrane surface perform their jobs, including the insulin receptor that every glucose-consuming cell in your body depends on. When you consume natural fats, whether saturated fats from whole animal foods or unsaturated fats from olive oil, nuts, and fish, your cells incorporate them into membrane structures in ways that preserve normal membrane function. But when you consume artificial trans fats, your cells incorporate them as well. Because the molecular architecture of trans fats is superficially similar enough to natural fats that the body's membrane construction machinery uses them without discrimination. The difference becomes apparent in the result. Membranes built partially from trans fats have fundamentally altered physical properties. They are less fluid. They are more rigid at normal body temperature. They are less capable of the dynamic flexibility that healthy cellular function requires. From this single point of structural compromise, a cascade of consequences flows. Cells with trans fat contaminated membranes produce inflammatory chemical signals more readily and persistently. They respond less efficiently to insulin, contributing independently to the insulin resistance pathway we described with sugary drinks and refined flour. They are more vulnerable to oxidative damage from free radicals circulating in the bloodstream. And at the level of pancreatic tissue specifically, this means that regular trans fat consumption establishes and reinforces exactly the hostile cellular environment that promotes progressive malfunction, accumulated DNA damage, and over time the kind of uncontrolled cellular proliferation that characterizes cancer. Trans fats also exert their damage through vascular pathways, elevating harmful LDL cholesterol particles while simultaneously reducing beneficial HDL cholesterol, promoting arterial inflammation, and impairing the blood flow that delivers oxygen and nutrients to organs throughout the body. When pancreatic tissue is chronically receiving suboptimal circulation while simultaneously bathed in inflammatory signaling molecules, the tissue is under a form of sustained biological stress that compounds all the other risk factors present in the environment. The action required here starts with a single and non-negotiable habit. Read ingredient labels before purchasing any packaged food. The specific phrase you must identify and avoid is partially hydrogenated oil. Any product whose ingredient list contains those 3 words contains artificial trans fats, regardless of what the front of the package claims about being healthy or natural. Replace margarine with real butter used thoughtfully and in moderation. Replace processed spreads with whole food fat sources, including olive oil, avocado, nut butters made from nothing but nuts, and tahini. These alternatives provide fats that your cells were designed over evolutionary time to incorporate and use efficiently, and which actively support rather than undermine cellular membrane function and inflammatory balance. Food number 5 involves a substance whose cultural and social presence is so enormous that discussing it honestly requires confronting significant denial and rationalization that exist at both individual and societal levels. The 5th food is alcohol. All types and all quantities of alcohol. Wine, beer, spirits, cocktails, hard seltzers, and every other beverage that contains ethanol. I want to address this one with complete candor because the popular narrative around alcohol consumption, particularly around so-called moderate or social drinking, contains a level of wishful thinking that has genuine consequences for the health of people who deserve honest information. Here is what your body actually does with every drink you take. When you consume alcohol, your liver immediately begins converting it into a compound called acetaldehyde. Acetaldehyde is not a benign intermediate in a harmless metabolic process. It is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 1 carcinogen. That is the same level of classification that tobacco smoke receives. Group 1 means sufficient evidence in humans for causation of cancer, not theoretical risk, not animal study associations, but sufficient human evidence. Acetaldehyde causes cancer in humans. That is the scientific consensus. Acetaldehyde is directly toxic to biological tissue in multiple documented ways. It forms stable chemical bonds with the bases that make up your DNA, creating what are called DNA adducts that disrupt the normal base pairing and prevent accurate replication of the genetic code. It depletes glutathione, which is one of the body's most important endogenous antioxidant molecules. Reduced glutathione means reduced capacity to neutralize free radicals and repair oxidative damage throughout every tissue your blood reaches. And it promotes sustained oxidative stress, which is a state of ongoing cellular damage that accelerates aging and dysfunction in affected tissues. Your pancreas is exposed to alcohol and its toxic metabolite acetaldehyde through two distinct routes simultaneously. Through the bloodstream, which delivers acetaldehyde systemically to every organ after the liver partially processes ethanol, and through the pancreatic duct, which runs physically adjacent to the digestive pathways that alcohol traverses during absorption. This dual exposure pathway means pancreatic tissue receives alcohol's toxic chemistry both from within, through the circulation, and from without, through proximity to the gastrointestinal tract. There is also a specific enzymatic mechanism through which alcohol damages the pancreas that has no equivalent with the other foods on this list. Your pancreas continuously produces powerful digestive enzymes, including lipase and protease, which are designed to activate and begin digesting biological material when they reach the appropriate environment in the small intestine. Alcohol disrupts the timing and regulation of this activation process. In the presence of alcohol, these enzymes can begin activating prematurely, while they are still within the pancreatic tissue itself. When pancreatic enzymes begin digesting the tissue that produced them, the result is pancreatitis. Acute pancreatitis is an emergency medical condition characterized by severe abdominal pain, nausea, and organ stress. Chronic pancreatitis, caused or significantly worsened by repeated alcohol exposure over time, is a condition of persistent inflammation, progressive tissue scarring, and deteriorating pancreatic function. And chronic pancreatitis is one of the most consistently and powerfully documented risk factors for the subsequent development of pancreatic cancer in the existing scientific literature. The biological progression from chronic pancreatitis to cancer reflects exactly the mechanism we have described across multiple foods, a tissue under sustained stress, cycling repeatedly through damage and attempted repair, accumulating mutations in the process until cellular control mechanisms fail. What I need to be direct about, and what the public health conversation around alcohol frequently avoids, is that the evidence on moderate alcohol consumption is considerably less reassuring than most people have been led to believe. The large-scale reanalyses of existing research that have been published in recent years have consistently found that the risk of cancer-related harm begins increasing at very low levels of consumption. There is no firmly established threshold below which alcohol exposure is biologically neutral for the pancreas. The familiar claim that moderate drinking is safe or even beneficial has been substantially revised by more recent and more rigorous research methodology. The honest position, grounded in current science, is that less alcohol means meaningfully less risk, and no alcohol means no alcohol-related risk. That is an important distinction. If elimination of alcohol is not realistic for your life, then reducing frequency and quantity represents a genuine and significant harm reduction. Compensating on alcohol-free days by emphasizing antioxidant-rich vegetables, adequate hydration, and foods that support liver function provides partial biological offset. But those compensatory measures cannot fully neutralize the carcinogenic effects of acetaldehyde. Reduction is good. Elimination is better. And now we arrive at food number 6, and this one is particularly relevant for anyone who grew up eating traditional preserved and fermented foods, or who regularly incorporates Asian, Mediterranean, Eastern European, or Latin American culinary traditions into daily cooking. The 6th food is high-sodium preserved and pickled foods consumed in large quantities and high frequency. This category includes heavily salt-cured fish, such as certain traditional preparations common across Asia and parts of Europe, vegetables pickled in very high concentration brine, fermented soybean pastes like doenjang, and miso used in large amounts, Soy sauce consumed generously across multiple meals per day, salt-preserved vegetables, and heavily brined products of all kinds. I want to be immediately clear about something important before explaining the mechanism, because this food category requires nuance. Fermented and preserved foods are not inherently harmful. Many traditional fermented foods have genuine documented health benefits when consumed in appropriate quantities. The danger I am describing is specifically about very high sodium intake from these sources consumed as daily staples in large quantities over long periods. Here is why, and here is the connection to your pancreas that most people have never been told. Extremely high dietary sodium intake creates specific conditions in the gastrointestinal environment that favor the proliferation of a bacterium called Helicobacter pylori, commonly referred to as H. pylori. If you have ever been told you have a stomach ulcer, there is a very high probability that H. pylori was involved, as it is responsible for the overwhelming majority of peptic ulcers. But H. pylori's relationship with cancer risk extends well beyond the stomach and the ulcers it causes. H. pylori infection drives a state of chronic mucosal inflammation throughout the upper gastrointestinal tract. It produces its own carcinogenic compounds through its bacterial metabolism, including nitroso compounds with chemical properties similar to the nitrosamines we discussed with processed meat. It produces enzymes that degrade the protective mucus layer lining the stomach and upper digestive tract, compromising the barrier that separates the interior of the gut from the underlying tissue layers and the bloodstream. When that barrier is compromised, bacterial metabolic products, inflammatory molecules, lipopolysaccharides from bacterial cell walls, and toxic compounds that would normally be contained within the gut lumen can cross into the submucosal tissue and enter the portal circulation, which flows directly to the liver and from there to the systemic bloodstream. From the systemic bloodstream, these compounds reach the pancreas. High sodium intake contributes to this cascade in two ways. First, it promotes H. pylori proliferation directly. Second, it independently damages the mucosal barrier integrity through the osmotic and irritant effects of high salt concentration on mucosal cells. Together, these effects create a situation where the upper gastrointestinal environment is chronically inflamed and functionally compromised, and where the compounds produced in that environment have a pathway to reach organs beyond the gut. There is also evidence that high sodium intake contributes to hypertension, which impairs the microvascular circulation that supplies blood to the pancreas and other organs. When pancreatic tissue receives chronically reduced blood flow, its capacity to function under metabolic stress is reduced, and its vulnerability to damage from the other risk factors we have discussed increases. For traditional fermented foods specifically, there is an additional chemical concern. Certain fermentation and preservation processes that involve protein-rich foods and salt brines can generate nitrosamines through the interaction of nitrite compounds produced by bacteria with amino acids in the food. These are the same carcinogenic compounds we identified with processed meat, formed through a different route but arriving at the same chemical destination. The concentration varies considerably depending on preparation method, fermentation duration, and temperature, but it represents a genuine compounding risk factor for people who eat these products in large quantities regularly. The practical path forward does not require abandoning traditional food culture or eliminating fermented foods entirely. Reduce the quantity of very high sodium preserved products you eat on a daily basis. Where low sodium alternatives exist for products like soy sauce, miso, or canned fish, use them consistently rather than occasionally. Rinse heavily salted or brined foods under fresh water before eating them, which removes a meaningful proportion of surface sodium without significantly affecting their flavor or texture. Balance meals that include high sodium preserved foods with generous portions of potassium-rich whole foods, including fresh vegetables, leafy greens, beans, and lentils, which help your body manage sodium load more effectively. Vary your protein sources so that heavily preserved products are one element of a diverse diet rather than a daily foundation. And focus on reducing the total dietary sodium load across all sources, because many people who limit obvious high-sodium foods are still consuming substantial sodium through bread, canned soups, packaged sauces, and restaurant meals where sodium is added invisibly and in large amounts. Now, before we close with the complete summary and the practical framework you need, I want to spend a moment on something that is genuinely important for how you integrate and apply what you have learned here. Everything I have shared with you today is grounded in published research, established biochemical mechanisms, and the documented assessments of international cancer research bodies. But I need to make several things clear so that this knowledge serves you constructively rather than creating anxiety that is disproportionate or paralyzing. Cancer is a profoundly multifactorial disease. There is no single food that will give any individual person pancreatic cancer with certainty after a given number of servings. What exists is a landscape of risk factors that accumulate, interact, and compound over time, and within which individual biology, genetics, and the totality of lifestyle choices all play significant roles. Each of the 6 foods we discussed today contributes to that landscape in a specific and mechanistically documented way. Through chronic inflammation, through direct DNA damage via genotoxic compounds, through pancreatic metabolic overload and beta cell exhaustion, through carcinogenic chemical formation, through cellular membrane corruption. But your actual personal risk is shaped by the totality of everything you do, eat, drink, and are exposed to across all the years of your life, not by any single food consumed in isolation. One serving of bacon will not give you pancreatic cancer. A soda at a birthday party will not destroy your beta cells. What these patterns of exposure do when they repeat consistently, day after day, week after week, year after year, and decade after decade, is progressively shift your biological environment in the direction of higher risk. It is the chronic repetition, not the single instance, that builds the dangerous environment. And it is chronic repetition that you have the genuine power to interrupt starting with your very next meal. The human body has remarkable capacity for recovery, regeneration, and repair when given the conditions that support these processes. Chronic inflammation, which we have seen as the common thread running through all 6 of these foods, can be substantially reduced within weeks of meaningful dietary improvement. Oxidative stress can be managed through consistent intake of antioxidant-rich whole plant foods. Beta cell health can be protected and partially restored by reducing the metabolic overload that excessive glucose and fructose place on your pancreas. Carcinogenic exposures can be meaningfully minimized through deliberate, informed food choices. None of these protections require perfection, and none of them require an overnight transformation of every eating habit you have. All of them require consistent effort applied in the right direction over time. If you are currently eating several of the foods we discussed today on a regular daily basis, the most important thing to internalize is that it is genuinely not too late to change the direction of your biological trajectory. Every positive change you make from this point forward begins accumulating benefit almost immediately. Inflammatory markers in the blood begin declining within weeks of reducing processed meat and refined flour. Insulin sensitivity begins recovering when glucose spikes are dampened. Oxidative stress markers improve when antioxidant-rich foods replace the sources of free radical generation. And the pancreas, like all organs, functions better and is less vulnerable to damage when the environment surrounding it and the demands placed upon it move in a healthier direction. I also want to say one final thing directly. This content is educational in its purpose and nature and is not a substitute for individualized medical evaluation and care. If you have concerns about your pancreatic health, if you have a personal or family history of pancreatic cancer, chronic pancreatitis, or type 2 diabetes, if you have been experiencing unexplained symptoms including persistent upper abdominal discomfort, unexplained weight loss, changes in stool consistency, or new onset diabetes in middle age, please discuss these concerns with a physician. Early evaluation, appropriate screening where it applies, and medical monitoring of known risk factors are among the most powerful tools available to people who have reason to be attentive to their pancreatic health. What you have now, having listened to everything presented in this video, is something that very few people walking into a grocery store or sitting down to a meal actually possess. You have specific, mechanistically grounded, scientifically based understanding of how 6 very common foods interact with the biology of your pancreas over time. You know why processed meats generate DNA damaging nitrosamines inside your digestive system, and why the World Health Organization has classified them as confirmed human carcinogens. You understand precisely how sugary drinks exhaust the insulin producing beta cells your pancreas depends on, and how they drive the insulin resistance that leads directly to diabetes and elevated cancer risk. You see how refined flour products deliver both the metabolic punishment of near pure starch and the carcinogenic chemistry of acrylamide through two distinct but compounding pathways. You understand how trans fats corrupt the cellular membranes that every pancreatic cell depends on for normal function, creating a structural foundation for inflammation and malfunction. You recognize how alcohol delivers a confirmed carcinogen directly to pancreatic tissue through both systemic circulation and proximity to the gastrointestinal tract, while also triggering the enzyme activation pathway that causes pancreatitis. And you understand how excessive consumption of high-sodium preserved foods promotes the H. pylori and inflammatory cascade that compromises the gut barrier and allows damaging compounds to reach organs far beyond the digestive tract. That knowledge is now yours. Use it with intelligence and without fear. Make the shifts that are realistic for you. Replace processed meats with whole protein sources. Remove sweetened beverages from your daily routine. Choose whole grains over refined flour. Eliminate partially hydrogenated oils from your pantry through label reading. Reduce alcohol consumption with honesty about what the science actually says. And moderate high-sodium preserved foods as part of a genuinely varied and vegetable-rich diet. These are not extreme demands. They are reasonable, evidence-based adjustments that, applied consistently over months and years, represent one of the most powerful investments any person can make in the health of the organ that regulates your digestion and your blood sugar every moment of every day. Your pancreas has been working quietly and faithfully for every year of your life, handling everything you have asked of it without complaint and without recognition. It cannot advocate for itself. It cannot tell you when it is under stress. It cannot send you an early warning when the damage begins to accumulate. That responsibility falls to you. Now you have the knowledge to fulfill it. Every meal is a choice. Every choice is an opportunity. And over a lifetime of consistent, informed choices, the opportunity to protect an organ that your life depends on is one that you now have the power to act on in a way that you simply did not have before today. Use that power. Your pancreas is counting on you.